What if I told you you could make epic, cinematic sounding music with brass, drums, and strings from Hans Zimmer's own library? That is what you get with Symphonic Elements by Ujam. My name is Taetro, and today I'm going to take you through how to use those plugins to create epic cinematic scores and also maybe some pop, hip-hop, contemporary genres as well. Check out my cinematic demo and then we'll dive right in. Alright, so that demo was pretty cinematic. I do have a couple other quick demos that are more in the pop, sort of hip-hop vein. Let's come back to all this after I show you how to actually make music with these plugins. As you might have noticed, strings, brass, and drums all have fairly similar interfaces. Let's start today though with strings. I'll pull in strings from the plugin browser, and here's what it looks like when we're getting started. Now I want to just focus in here on this lower third of the plugin for now. Ignore everything above, we'll get to that later, because down here is the key to making music with the symphonic elements. And key was pun intended, because we have a keyboard down here and you can see that the ranges of different octaves are labeled and separated. How do we use those? Well, let's go ahead and start with the C3 to C4 range, because that is how we're going to actually make sound with the plugin. And you can see that I'm just holding down a single key and I'm getting a full musical idea, because that's the idea around a lot of the symphonic elements. Instead of playing individual instruments note for note, creating your own melodies, you're actually pulling from this super high quality sample library that adapts to the kind of music that you are making. So back to the keys. The C3 to C4 range is where we will play. And you can hear that the notes change as I change notes on the keyboard. That's pretty intuitive. We may want to set our key to make sure that as we make music with the symphonic elements, the notes and phrases remain in key. So let's just keep it in C major for now. That will make sure that when I play C, we're getting a C major. When I play A, we will get notes based around a minor chord, which we'll hear more clearly in a moment. If you look slightly to the left, you see that in the C2 range, we have bass notes available. So if I go back to that A minor, but I use notes in the C2 range, I can actually change the bass note. So I can transform these phrases as we go. Also notice that right here, we will get a label for whatever chord we're playing, and as the bass note changes, it'll show us a slash. So here we're playing A minor over an F in the bass. Down here in the C1 range is how we change which phrases we're playing, and they will actually get more and more intense from left to right. So pay attention to just the white keys here. We're already on a very intense pattern here. And you can see that that key is being held, that A1. If I change that to G1, the plugin will respond to whatever note in the 1 range that I hit last. So this will be slightly less intense. All the way down to C1, we will have sort of the most gentle, quiet phrase. And as I dial that up a little more, now I'm starting to feel like there's somebody behind me. But you get the idea. We can change the phrases and they build an intensity from left to right. Now, what about some of these black keys? You can see that we have the additions label here. Well, that will actually add notes in on top of the phrase that we're already playing. So let's go to a middle intensity phrase here. And while that's playing, I'm actually going to press the D flat button. Can you hear those extra cello notes? Let's switch to F sharp and add some different notes. flat. So the same as the white keys, from left to right, these additions will build an intensity as well. Then we have two other keys, end and stop. End will end us with a note. Stop will just stop the phrase. Now, another thing that's really cool are the pitch and mod strips, which don't actually affect pitch and modulation in this situation. They affect something totally different. On the modulation strip on my keyboard here, I can actually adjust the intensity with which these phrases are played. So let's go to the highest intensity phrase here on A1. Very intense. If I use the modulation slider here, I can build the intensity up over time. This is also something you can do with your mouse, and I'm going to show you another way we can automate that in a moment. To the left of that, we have pitch bend, which instead of being a pitch bend, will actually focus us between the higher strings. So now you can hear those lower strings are not coming in anymore, those bass notes. As I come back down, we'll start to fade those back in till we're in the center, and we have perfect balance between those two. Back down. Our higher strings become less prominent, but our lower strings stay really strong. And when I release that, it snaps back to the center. There's another way to tweak this intensity, but we'll get to that later. Before we go any further, you might be asking yourself, well, I don't have a big keyboard and I don't want to play all this in live. How can I actually start writing some of these phrases? Let's do that right now, because you don't even need a controller to be able to do this. In Ableton Live, I'm going to create an empty 4-bar clip. Now let's use what we just learned about these ranges of keys to write our string part. First, I'll want to decide on which notes I want to play. I think if I go from A to F, that will sound pretty good. Let's start with that. So again, I'm in the A3 and F3 range. So I find that down here in my piano MIDI roll. Let's hold A for 1 bar and let's hold F for another bar. Click play. And that was pretty successful. I'm just going to duplicate those two notes. Now let's decide what kind of phrase we want, because this intense phrase is just happening because the last phrase note we touched was A1, the most intense. If I change that to C1, this will completely change. So let's make a permanent decision here, and let's go ahead and write a note in the 1 range here in my MIDI clip. So I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to find F1. Like I said, the plugin will always respond to the last phrase note that it received. So you don't have to extend this. You can just have it be really short. I just like to keep things organized and have it extended for the length that it's present for. So let's have it go from F1, kind of like middle intensity, to G1, a little bit higher intensity. Hear the difference and watch the plugin. Now you can see that I didn't rewrite another phrase note here, so it just stayed on G1. If I want this to repeat, I can just duplicate those. 3, 4, higher intensity. And then higher intensity again. Let's actually just switch that to A1, very intense for that last bar. But don't forget, we also have the ability to write in some additions here in this 1 range. Let's have some additions come in on F#1 here in this 2nd bar. Let's hear how that sounds. Additions coming. And I actually kind of really like how the additions sound. So let's write in some more. D#. Let's write D#. Remember, these are going to raise in intensity as we go. And I actually might just keep the same level of additions on F# throughout the whole thing. Actually, let's ratchet it up. Let's go 1 level more of intensity there. And let's go to G#. See the difference on bar 4? Dun, 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 dun. Continues. And then... Great, I like how that sounds. Let's play with a couple quick stops. So remember the note B, B1, we can kind of create something rhythmic by including some stops in there. I'll just include a random stop, beat 4, bar 2. 3, let me just demonstrate for you the difference between that stop and an end. I'm going to go ahead and copy this note, but bring it down to A sharp or B flat. And now this is an end, which means we'll end on a note instead of just silence. 3, 4. Here's that was a stop. Here comes our end. And ends on a note instead of just stopping. Finally, we haven't made any adjustments to our bass notes. So let's go ahead and adjust our bass note. In the 2 range now, I'm going to find a note that I think might work with this A minor. Let's go ahead and try an E for a bass note here in the first bar. That works pretty well. And for our F chord, let's maybe see what it sounds like with a D in the bass. And then since I haven't chosen bass notes for the next chords, it's going to go back to playing those chords in root position. It's not like selecting a phrase where the previous selection will carry over. It's always going to revert back to its proper bass note if you haven't told the plugin to play a different one. Okay, not too bad. I want you to remember something though. We talked about this modulation being able to change the intensity. Well, if we want to automate that, we can always automate our modulation envelope. I go into envelopes, select MIDI control, and find modulation or the modulation wheel. We can make this grow in intensity over time. And I can sort of make a V shape to have the intensity build and then come back down. You do that maybe twice as fast, like this, and then build up towards the end. So now we've got this shape of intensity. Kind of extreme, but you can see how you can start playing with dynamics by automating the minimum and maximum intensity. But I'll go ahead and remove that automation for now so we can properly hear everything that we're changing about the strings. I'm not going to apply the same level of automation to the high and low on the pitch bend, and I'll tell you about why later. Let me first direct your attention to style here, because this is actually where the unique phrases are contained. If I change the style, we get completely different musical ideas. So you can actually hear, if you hear that kind of like wooden sound, that is actually some of the additions here. That's unique to this particular style. If I keep changing the style, I really like this one. Oh, some triplets there on the additions. That was cool. One more to check out. Here, let's find something interesting. Gather the troops. Kind of a march. Very heroic sounding, but what I want you to notice is that we didn't change anything about the notes that we had in our MIDI clip. We just changed the style, and that can change the musical possibilities for our already written string piece. We are still sending the same notes. We're still doing the bass note changes. We're still doing our intensity changes with the phrases, but we're getting new musical ideas, new samples from the different styles. Okay, now before we go any further with strings, let me show you how this works exactly the same way in brass. All right, and looking at this new instance of brass, you can see that this bottom part of the plugin looks exactly the same. Now let me make sure we set our key properly as we did in strings. And if I use the play range in C3, I can change the bass note. And I can change the phrase. Again, going from different levels of intensity from left to right. We have phrases, bass notes, the play range, and additions. Same as before, high and low on the pitch bend, minimum and maximum intensity, on modulation, and we can change our styles. But let me show you something really cool. If I grab that exact same MIDI clip that we created for strings, I can simply copy that into brass. Now, I haven't tested this. We're doing this in real time. I'm not sure if it's going to sound amazing, but since the notes, bass notes, and phrase switching are all in the same MIDI note ranges, we should get a pretty interesting brass part. Again, with the stops and the starts, with the bass note changes, they're all there. So I just copied the same exact MIDI clip after composing for strings, and now as I change the styles, we get some pretty cool brass compositions. That's pretty cool, actually. I wonder if this would even sound good with the strings. Here, let's put them together. Oh, the triplets on the strings get a little weird, but that first bar, that actually sounded pretty cool. A little bit of syncopation there. So composing between these is actually fairly easy. Actually, if I just remove that triplet addition in the strings, it sounds pretty good. Let's keep this same addition, this D sharp in the strings, in place of those triplets that we had before. Very, very cool. But if you've been paying attention, you might have noticed that not only does the bottom part of the plugin look exactly the same from strings to brass, but this top part here with low on the left, high on the right, and finisher in the middle is also the same in both strings, brass, and drums. Low, high, finisher in the middle. So let's start talking about how to shape our sound with those elements. I'm going to go back to our brass part here. So you can hear from before when we were actually playing with this high and low slider, there's instruments playing in the higher range, then there's instruments playing in the lower range. And the reason I kept alluding to another way of controlling the highs and the lows here is actually because there's a crossfader that doesn't snap back to the middle in the same way the pitch bend wheel will. So you can actually crossfade and focus on your higher instruments or your lower instruments there. If I were going to automate between highs and lows, I would use the crossfade instead of the pitch bend. But we can actually isolate those highs and lows in this top part of the plugin. I can turn off either one. Here's just the lows. I've completely turned off the high brass. And I can do the same for lows. We can also color these sounds separately with character effects and motion effects for each. Character effects will be things like EQs and filters. We can even get a little more creative with some bit crushing, some lo-fi effects. Here, let's listen to just the lows. Let's dial in this lo-fi. So you can get really creative with some of these effects here, but you can also be like very utilitarian and use it to just adjust the width of either the lows or the highs, or get extreme and start adding some distortion in there. That's your character effects, and you have those available on both sides of the plugin, highs and lows. You also have motion effects, which can be anything from delays. Actually, that's what we have here on the lows. A ping pong delay. You can see that we have different time divisions of the ping pong delay here. We also have things like chorus, as well as things like filtered gates and things like that. Like the name says, basically any kind of effect you can imagine to add motion to your part. Even a reverser, which is really cool. So you can see we can get kind of almost like sci-fi with some of these controls, which makes it great for modern production as well as more cinematic production. Again, motion effects and character effects are available on both sides for the highs and the lows, as well as a focus EQ slider for each. So we can focus our lows on a darker sound, while our highs are very focused on a brighter tone. But let's darken those higher tones, and let's kind of focus in on those for a moment. Darker EQ on the highs here, brightening them up like that. Now listen what happens when I change the shape slider. This will have an effect on the attack of your notes. So you can see as I slide to the left, we're sort of cutting in onto the sample start, onto the attack. And as I go to the right, we get a sort of softer attack. Same on the other side of the plugin as well. Now, if I open up strings, you're going to see something very similar. You're going to see character effects and motion effects. Here, let's listen to some of those. A little bit crushing. A little delay. Less bit crushing. Focus on those highs. But in here, you're going to see a decay slider. So let's actually turn down the character and motion effects, and let's listen to how the decay slider affects these strings. As we move the decay slider to the left, the sound just gets a little tighter. And obviously, depending on the style that you choose, this will have a greater or lesser effect because some styles feature phrases with shorter notes or longer notes. Now, I want to talk about this center section here, but I realize that we've been neglecting drums for a bit. So let's head over to the Symphonic Elements drums. And we're going to listen to a section from the demo that I played earlier. Very bombastic sounding. Now, take a look and remember everything that we just went over. We have lows and highs on either side. Notice that highs are turned off over here because I wanted to just feature the low drums and this bombastic percussion. And then look down here below and you're going to actually see a much simpler playing keyboard with common phrases and style phrases. If you've used other ujam plugins, you might already be familiar with common phrases and style phrases, but if not, you can think of common phrases as just typical phrases that you might want on a percussion instrument. These are going to be the same no matter what kit, no matter what style you choose. The style phrases, however, are going to be unique to each individual style. And like we demonstrated earlier, as we move from left to right on the keyboard, the phrases get more and more intense. Now we've got endings and stop, which is similar to how it works in strings and brass. But we've also got fills here. Now what a fill will do is play like a short, exciting fill phrase and then revert back to your original phrase. So if we look at the example from the demo that I showed earlier, if we look at the MIDI, we go from note B to note A sharp or B flat. And you can watch that play out here and you can hear that fill come in. Da, 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 dum, 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 da, dum, dum. Intros are also like fills, but they are meant to start a song. Cool thing about intros and fills is they will always lead back to the phrase that you're playing. Another thing that makes the player section of drums a little unique from strings or brass is that we also get access to hits. If I change styles, we'll get different sounds. So you could add hits to these already existing phrases, or write your own percussion part with these individual hits if you wanted to. And just like brass and strings, if we change style, you will get different musical ideas. And different sounds. So cool. Okay, but let's take a look at Finisher in the middle, where we use the left and the right side of the plugin to shape the sound of the lows and the highs across all the symphonic elements. Finisher is how we adjust the overall sound. Now, we've got a highlighter here, which, as you can hear, is doing filtering, so we can get that higher end. This is really useful for mixing or the low end. We also have ambience, which gives us a selection of delays and reverbs. I've got a ping pong delay on this one. But of course, some big reverbs are more than welcome. And then in the middle here, you might have actually noticed that this is automated. I automated it in this track. The just more effect is what I have selected on this middle finisher knob. And if I take control of that, you can see that we're really pushing the sound here. It's a great tool for intensity. But in the finisher effects, you're going to see a few different categories. Some can get pretty weird, like glitch. Intense and weird, I would say. Let's check out Swamp Creature. Appropriately named, I would say, and still going. Dirt, which is going to be a bunch of our distortions, add some crunch. Ways to shape the sound, here's Second Shadow. It's almost like a motion effects, but for the whole drum kit. Beyond, if you want to get really far out there. And then of course there's Master, which is where the Just More preset that I was using is. These are going to be more like your typical mastering effects. Let's go fat and dirty for a moment. Very cool. To jump back to symphonic brass for a moment, I just want you to take a look at Finisher and see that it's pretty much exactly the same. We've got the highlighter. Again, this is different than the crossfade. Crossfade is actually giving us a mix that either favors or even solos the higher or lower end, whereas highlighter is an actual filter. We're filtering the whole sound. Ambiance here, hall reverbs and delays, same as before, and then finisher effects, some that are tailored a bit more to the specific instrument that you're opening in here, but you can see that the overall function of finisher is the same across brass, drums, and strings. And that's the finisher, but before we finish here, I think I should go over some things. One very basic thing that I skipped over was the fact that there are presets. Now, when I scan through these presets, I want you to notice that all the parameters and the style is going to be changing. So everything about the plugin will change between these different presets. That never gets old in any movie trailer. You can explore all the different presets which are tailored for different uses. Some cinematic riffs that definitely do not disappoint. Or some more out there sounds. There's a whole pop and electronic category here. Which actually brings me to two more examples that I've created. This is sort of a K-pop, hip-hop-ish kind of demo that I made, but listen to the strings in the intro. And then brass just doing a great job of doing those hits. But there's another element here that you actually might not recognize as brass. Let me open it up. There's that little synth in the middle. Believe it or not, that is brass, and that is coming from the EDM Cool Groove preset. So we've got this cool synth sound as well as these brass stabs. it's pretty cool to think that those sounds are coming from the same plugin and can be used pretty well in a more pop style genre. I want to also point out here that those cool little drum fills, they might not sound totally bombastic and cinematic, but they actually add a really nice texture to the transition here in the song. That's just 2 layers of drums. Listen to that fill again with it soloed. Very cool fill to add in a K-pop style track like this. But if you're more into the traditional pop kind of singer-songwriter style, these plugins also do a great job at that. Here I've got a few different layers of strings. Hear them build in here. And you can hear I've got that sort of motif playing that comes in during the intro. Which, by the way, a little bit of automation happening here. Crossfading, going from just the higher strings to a mix of the highs and lows, which is perfect for an intro. Followed by these more soaring single notes that make it just a little more emotional. Put those together, we get something like a nice big epic string section that is fit for like a radio pop tune. A couple other quick things that I skimmed over while we were getting to know these plugins. There is a latch button here so that instead of having to hold down a note to keep it playing, you can just latch it. No hands. There's also a timing menu here, which can help you add swing to the patterns. Or you can change the speed of these phrases. You can play them in half speed or double speed. Can be very useful for trying to include the symphonic elements in tracks with a range of BPMs. And that's about it. Symphonic Elements lets you sort of conduct a world-class orchestra right from your DAW. So whether you're creating a cinematic score or just an epic piece of music or some of the more pop-style genres, give Symphonic Elements a try with the trial that is linked down below. And if you want to hear more sound demos from Symphonic Elements, you can also find that on the website. My name is Taetro here with Ujam. If you found this tutorial helpful, please let us know in the comments down below. That's all for now. Have a good one.